Today we're going to talk about the Mayan civilization. You should already have a worksheet available, have a pencil at hand, have your pause button ready so you can take the note if you need to stop it before you move on. And here we go. The people of the Mayan civilization come from an area called Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica, specifically, make sure you can see it, Mesoamerica specifically is southern Mexico, modern-day southern Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, northern Costa Rica, the Yucatan Peninsula, that whole area in there, that is Mesoamerica. So now we kind of know where they came from. Did you see that? That was cool. We need to know when they came from. The history of Mesoamerica is broken up into time periods, and the time periods sometimes are just called names regarding the time period, and sometimes they are divided up referring to the people that were prominent at that time, and I'll tell you which is which as we get there. There's even one city time period, you'll see. The first time period we want to talk about is the Archaic time period, and the Archaic time period refers to 7,000 to 2,000 BCE. And this is when the hunter-gatherers, remember the hunter-gatherers? The people who were chasing their food and chasing their resources? Well, they figured out that they didn't have to do that. They can domesticate some animals, they can domesticate some plants, they can stay in one place, and they do. They actually get quite famous for domesticating maize, and they also begin to build the first villages in Mesoamerica. So they begin to grow, to live in a group and grow their cities, or grow their villages. Next, this one refers to a people, and this is the Olmec. And the Olmec go from, their civilization goes from 1500 to 200 BCE. These people, the Olmecs, they settle along the Gulf of Mexico, and they begin to build cities. So we take these villages, we kind of grab everybody up, and we say, let's go live together bigger, and they grow a city. The interesting thing about the Olmecs is that they are super mysterious. No historian, knows where they came from. And no historian knows where they went. They just left evidence behind that they existed, and that's all we have. So one of the great history mysteries in world history. The next are another people, and they are called the Zapotec people. The Zapotec people lived from 600 BCE to 800 CE. And these people lived near modern-day Oaxaca. These are the people that began to experiment with the ideas of writing and math and astronomy and calendars, all the stuff that the Mayan are going to take from them, grab and run with, and make even better and more refined later on. The next time period refers to a city, and this is the Teotihuacan period. Teotihuacan, and can you see it? Teotihuacan, and it is 200 to 900 CE. And it's during this time that this city, Teotihuacan, grows from a little bitty village to a great big city. Some historians probably have up to 200,000 people living in and around Teotihuacan. This is a major, major settlement. This is where we're going to have governments and infrastructure and economics and taxes. This is where we begin to see this in Mesoamerica. This is also where, if you want a reference, where the Pyramid of the Sun is. The next time period is El Tajín, pardon my terrible pronunciation. I'm going to call it the Classic period because I can say that, 250 to 900 CE. And this is where cities all around Mesoamerica are being built. This is where, you're going to have to excuse my dog, there's somebody outside, he's going to bark. Cities were being built up everywhere in Mesoamerica, and people we call the Maya are just beginning to number in the millions. This is where they really flourish. This is the time period in which the Mayan civilization is really the thing to be in Mesoamerica. And finally, the post-classic pyramid, 950 to 1524 CE. And this is a really interesting time period in that this is where the Mayan cities, all these hundreds and hundreds of cities, begin to be abandoned. Now, this isn't necessarily pre-Columbian, but it begins pre-Columbian. What are we talking about pre-Columbian? Columbian sounds like the explorer Christopher Columbus. So it's before the old world, ding ding, and the new world collide, before the old world comes over and meets the new world, and the Europeans come and set foot on South America and begin to spread their disease and kind of bad things. It begins before that, but by the time it's over, it is post-Columbian, and most of the Mayan cities are just completely abandoned. The really interesting thing about this whole situation is that the people who live in what we call Mesoamerica today, many of the indigenous peoples are Mayan by descent. Their first one is their writing system. They actually did have a writing system. Not much of it remains. The Spanish took care of that. They used a type of papyrus that I think was used from, that was rather made from banana leaves, and a lot of that was burnt. But there's a lot of the writing left in carvings, engravings, and stelas, and things like that. And then had about 800 glyphs, 800 symbols. So that's quite an extensive. Think of us. Our English alphabet has 26 glyphs, and they had 800. So that's really complicated. They also developed in math the concept of zero. Think about it. How could we do math if we didn't have something to represent in a concept of nothing? Couldn't do it. They also developed a calendar that became super famous in 2012, and you can look that up if that interests you. But they developed this calendar because their astronomers, guys who study the stars in the sky and the sun and the moon and all that stuff, their astronomers determined that a solar year, the time it takes for the Earth to rotate around the sun, is about 365 days. Who knew? And so they were able to create a calendar from that. Another thing that they actually didn't do, interestingly, weirdly enough, not so much with the wheel. They found very little use for it. They didn't really use the wheel. Interesting. They also didn't use beasts of burden. Now, they didn't have horses, but they had different types of oxen and llamas and things, and they didn't use those animals. That's what you call an animal that moves stuff for you, carries stuff for you. They didn't use them. So if you wanted to move something from point A to point B, it was you. You were the beast of burden. You were the one carrying the stuff, or you and your buddies, or you and your family. Another one of their accomplishments architecturally is the pyramid at Chichen Itza. Now, this is an awesome pyramid. It is also called the Pyramid of Kukulkan, which is the serpent god of the Maya. And it is a pyramid built to him, to honor him. Pyramids are great. We love pyramids. We've dealt with a lot of pyramids so far already, mounds too. But the most interesting thing about Chichen Itza is that you have to understand how much engineering they understood, how much about geography they understood, how much about the season changing, the calendar they understood. Math, crazy. Let me tell you why. Because at 2 times in the year, at the vernal equinox and at the autumnal equinox, we just had a vernal equinox. That means spring started. That's when spring starts. When spring starts and autumn starts, only 2 times a year, when the sun hits this pyramid at Chichen Itza just right, it casts a shadow that looks like a serpent. What's a serpent? What? Oh, snake. That's right, a snake. It looks like a snake. Remember, this pyramid was built to honor Kukulkan, who was the serpent god. So 2 times a year, it was placed in such a way that only 2 times a year, when the sun hits it just right, they could figure that out, and it's perfect. And people still go there. They just were there just not too long ago at the vernal equinox, spring equinox, to see it. Let me read this little clip for you. According to legend, twice a year, when the day and night are in balance, this pyramid is dedicated to Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god, is visited by its namesake, meaning the god comes to the pyramid. On the equinox, Kukulkan returns to Earth to commune with his worshippers. That's my phone. Shh. Provide blessing for a full harvest and good health before entering the sacred water, bathing in it, and continuing through it on his way to the underworld. So he comes back 2 times a year to check out all his people that worship him and to make sure everybody's good before he moves on to the underworld. The underworld is a part of the Maya religion that everybody believes in, and they believe that everybody at some point after their death does spend some time in the underworld, no matter how good or great you were. It's just kind of how it goes. You have to go to the underworld before you go on to your next thing. The only people who get out of spending time in the underworld are babies who die at birth. So that's kind of nice. Let's talk some more about their contributions and their achievements. They were farmers, as we've mentioned, and we mentioned that they were the domesticators of maize, but they also grew beans and squash and chili and pumpkin. They hunted deer and rabbit and turkey, small game. It is a point in time that we're going to call the pre-classic period, from about 250 BCE to 250 CE, that this is where really the Mayan civilization blows up. And there's so many cities that actually evolve into city-states, much like some of the other civilizations we looked at, Greece and Mesopotamia. And each city-state would choose a leader, choose a king, And they would choose this guy because he would be the one who would talk to the gods if they needed some help. They needed, hey, we're having a bad harvest. You need to talk to the gods, and that would be that guy's job. It would also be his job to lead them into battle with other city-states. They did not get along very well. They were always skirmishing and fighting over one thing or another. Probably land, probably water, probably money. That's usually what city-states fight over. Despite the fact that they fought so much, they also had an extensive trade network, ding ding. And this trade network went up and down Mesoamerica. Here's what they traded with and for. Do you remember what trade is, though? Trade is when you have what you need, you have what you have, and you trade it for someone, trade it with someone who has something you need, and you trade back and forth, and eventually that will turn into money, and that will be economics. So remember your grapes? Economics was in there. Anyway, they traded with and for food, salt, clothes, tools, weapons, jade, the pretty green stone, feathers and gold. They like pretty things. They traded with and for honey, animal pelts, animal skins, dried chili peppers, pottery. They traded with and for obsidian, which is that black rock, and jewelry. And they traded with other city-states that maybe they had fought with at one point in time. And they established really important trade routes that can be found today if you are that kind of archaeologist that can find that kind of stuff in a jungle, which is where most of this stuff is. And if you were on the coast, and you were a trader that lived on the coast, you would create this huge dugout canoe, enormous dugout canoe, much bigger than what you're probably picturing in your mind. And this dugout canoe would hold not only the trader and all the stuff he's trading, but also up to 20 people. These things were huge, and they would travel up and down the coast in order to trade their wares with other city-states. Finally, the Maya were polytheistic. They believed in more than one god. Remember the word polytheistic? Well, I'm going to read you a little thing called from a publication called Great Discoveries in Archaeology. This is from 2013. I'm going to paraphrase a little because it gets a little long-winded. The Maya religion involves several aspects of nature, astronomy, and rituals. Most gods represented a form of nature. For example, sun god was Kini Ahus, or the maize god was Yomkax. The Mayans were known for their calendars and astronomical buildings like Chichen Itza. They were used during their religious rituals. Similar to the Egyptians, the Mayans built pyramid-like temples for religious reasons. Now, the main difference in the shape being, this is the main difference in the shape, being that the Mayan pyramids have a flat top and they would build temples on top of that. Now, you know that Egyptian pyramids were actually tombs. Religious, yes, but they were not often used for any kind of ritual after they were created, filled, and then sealed off. The Mayans built two types of pyramids, and one type was meant to be climbed. It had stairs. These pyramids were used during human sacrifices. This was a part of the Mayan religion that they believed in, that sacrificing humans made the gods happy. We're not really going to talk more about that, except to say they did. The other type of pyramid was not to be touched or even climbed. These pyramids were sacred and often built with too steep a step to climb, or a false door so you couldn't really get in it. Now, when these pyramids were being used for ritual, the priests would take their lives into their hands and attempt to climb the pyramid, very dangerous undertaking to do. And the priests would climb these pyramids in order to get closer to their gods. These pyramids had usually 2 to 4 staircases, and they would have a platform near the middle somewhere so they can stop, a little flat place in the middle so they can stop. And usually those platforms are used for any kind of major priestly ritual or a major king ritual. And you remember the king is probably, if not a god, just under a god. As I mentioned, the Mayan religion was polytheistic, and they had over 165 gods. And the gods were human-like. They were born, they grew up, they got married, they had kids, they had problems and adventures, and they died. And that's how the Maya looked at their gods. They didn't live on the same plane as the humans did, the same earthly plane, but they lived somewhere else, and they had their own lifespans to attend to. The Mayans also believed that every person had an animal companion who shared their soul. They were called We'ab. Pardon my bad pronunciation, We'ab. And the Mayan religion told that one could transform into their animal companion when the time came. Now, every king had a jaguar. And they were often depicted with jaguars in Mayan art. And finally, Mayans mostly only had one animal spirit companion, but unless you're like a really super important and powerful priest, they could have up to 2 animal companions, but just them. So there we go. This is just your very brief, very nutshell-y introduction to the Mayan civilization.